Madeline James, and today we are embarking upon the third part of my new cultural world building guide series, which is sort of the second step to my physical global world building guide series. And today we're going to be focusing on animal domestication. And I do want to note before we get too much further in that this video version is coupled with the blog on my website, which is going to be linked below. All the same, similar information there, that sort of a thing. And also, for those of you that are interested, I recently started a Discord for people that were interested in communicating with me about the world building guides, talking about different world building guide issues for me to, throw ideas off of and kind of chat about, share articles, one of those things. So if you're, super hardcore world builder and you want to join the Discord, just send me a message on my website. There's a contact me, just fill that out and say, hey, please give me the invite link for the Discord. It's not public, but it's not necessarily private restricted either. So if you want to join, just send me a message and I'll send you the invite link. But let's get into this. So I mentioned this part is for animal domestication. So in the last two parts, essentially, we created our cultural cluster divide maps, tracked early human migration, and made a map of the severity of major extinction events, which is going to come into play now. So we just need to expand on that to talk about one part of agriculture, animal husbandry. So, typical disclaimer, I'm going to go through it real quick. For our purposes, we are not trying to explain the nature and cultures of real peoples or delve into the true complexity of these topics. Our aim is to fill our worlds with fictional cultures and societies that are rooted in their physical worlds and feel real. We want to look at the trends, patterns, and simplifications of real-world historical societies and challenges that people faced to consider the ways they overcame them and other ways that a fictitious people could do so as well. If you are an anthropologist, you will probably find this system overly simple and perhaps a bit reaching, but it is certainly not meant to be an explanation for the development of real-world cultures. And also remember that in real life, and in this guide, every rule and every pattern can be broken. All right. Animal domestication. So animals must be domesticated to provide much use for civilization. There are three different classes of animal domestication. Some are domesticated as pets, like hamsters and modern dogs. Some are domesticated to be livestock, like cattle and sheep. And some are domesticated to be beasts of burden, like horses, donkeys, etc. And some animals can be domesticated for multiple classes, like oxen pulling plows and carts, but cattle are also livestock. And some animals can be tamed or even captive bred, but not truly domesticated. And the two categories we will be concerned with are livestock, but mainly beasts of burden. Livestock provide a reliable source of animal products like meat, eggs, milk, wool, etc., where beasts of burden can carry heavy loads, goods, or people, or perform heavy work like pulling a plow. The availability of both can have a large impact on a civilization. Having domesticated livestock is required for animal husbandry, and beasts of burden are not only needed for quicker and more efficient transportation of people and goods, but they also provide labor, making agriculture more efficient. So, not every type of animal can be domesticated. In Guns, Germs, and Steel, which, isn't necessarily a perfect account, but it's pretty good for our purposes here, Diamond lists only 14 total large domesticable animals, ones that could be / have been used as draft animals that are found on Earth. There are 5 major international domesticatable animals, and these include sheep, goats, cows, pigs, and horses. Minor ones, such as Arabian camel, Bactrian camel, llama, alpaca, and donkey. And then some more minor local ones, reindeer, water buffalo, yak, Bali cattle, Mathan/Gyle cattle, gaur or Indian bison. And the availability of these animals will also have the largest impact on the culture and food production of a civilization at this stage anyway. And as a note, we are not considering animals that can be individually tamed, but not domesticated as a species, and there is a very important difference. So, yes, there was a guy that drove around London in a carriage pulled by zebras, but no, zebras are not domesticable. And also elephants are not domesticated. They need brutal training to allow human contact, like being ridden. And please read up on this if you do not believe me. So, what makes an animal domesticable? Well, in Guns, Germs, and Steel, Diamond lists 6 criteria for domestication, and these include not be picky eaters. They must be able to find enough food, such as herbivores foraging and carnivores scavenging, and be easy enough for humans to feed. Any animals that are very hard for humans to feed are going to be very difficult to be domesticated. They must mature quickly. Animals should reach maturity quickly. We can't waste too many years raising an animal before they are useful to us. It just wouldn't be worth it. For example, cattle take 2 years to reach maturity, horses take 4 to 6, and pigs only take 6 months. They must breed in captivity. This should be pretty obvious, but it takes many generations for an animal to be considered domesticated. So if an animal can't consistently breed in captivity, they must be caught in the wild, meaning progress cannot be made in domestication, and it also wouldn't be sustainable. They must be docile. Aggression doesn't necessarily rule out the possibility of domestication, but it does make it far more difficult and unlikely. Cows and sheep are pretty docile, but dogs do come from pretty aggressive animals. This does help explain why zebras, which are more aggressive than horses, were not domesticated, and why the American bison, which is quite dangerous to humans, was never domesticated. They must also have no strong tendency to panic and flee. Animals that spook easily and run away aren't as easily domesticated. This is why deer, which tend to take off when even minorly started, are not very domesticable. Animals that have a flocking instinct, however, when they are spooked, like sheep, are perfectly domesticable and can be herded. If an animal is easily spooked, it's a question of flock or flight to determine domesticability. And then last, they must conform to a social hierarchy. Domesticated animals must be able to recognize humans as their pack or herd leaders. Solitary animals are not really domesticable, and let's not talk about cats. Are they even truly domesticated? I don't know. So these are things to keep in mind if you are creating your own fantasy creatures. There are likely animals that could have been domesticated that never have been due to the difficulty, but the odds of seeing that in a world would be low. That said, if you really want to have an odd animal be domesticated that doesn't necessarily fit into these criteria, just give the people a strong reason to have domesticated them and maybe come up with some creative reasons for why they did and why they solved the problems that are presented by not meeting all of these different criteria. Alright, so where are these domesticated animals found? We are going to put aside the extinction events that we mapped for the last section and come back to that in a bit. So if we look at the 14 animals we listed before, there are environments that are more suited to them, with different species and breeds perhaps adapted to different environments. The 5 major animals are adaptable in many different ways, allowing them to be found in most places at the point from, tundra to desert for almost all of them. There are sheep, goat, cow, pig, and horse breeds that are suited to almost every single climate that humans are. In the livestock of the world graphic that you can see here, you can see the modern day distribution of some major livestock animals, and you can see that, a lot of these have a very wide availability of places that they can be found. So these are the habitats where the major 5 will most likely be found or domesticated first. We are going to talk about the fact that they will spread later, right, in multiple phases in this part and in later parts. But for now, sheep are very hardy animals, and they are most adapted to higher elevations and more extreme climates like mountainous regions. Goats are slightly less hardy than sheep, but well adapted to rocky areas, forests, shrubland. Cows are grazing animals, so they are best suited for anywhere there are grasslands or more open woodlands. Pigs prefer warmer but not hot or arid climates like grasslands, forests, marshes, etc., where they can forage for food. And horses prefer wide open spaces so they can defend themselves, so they prefer plains, prairie, and steppe regions. So as for the others, Arabian and Bactrian camels and donkeys are found in arid regions like deserts. Llamas are naturally found in drier mountainous regions and high plateaus with shrubland biomes. Alpacas are naturally found in marshy mountainous regions with cold climates. Reindeer live in tundra climates and taiga/boreal forests. Water buffalo live in tropical or subtropical forests and wet grasslands around rivers and mud holes. Yak are naturally found in tundra and prefer grassland in colder mountainous plateaus. Bali cattle are found in hot and humid regions, namely Indonesia. The Methane/Guile cattle prefer cooler climates and hill regions like highland forests, and the Gaur/Indian bison prefer low-lying forested hills. One other note would be dogs. I think they are worth mentioning. Dogs were likely the first domesticated animal all the way back in the late Pleistocene, from gray wolves in Siberia about 23,000 years ago. Everywhere humans went after that, dogs went too. They were pretty ideal additions to small human groups at the time. They fitted into the pack structure and helped hunt and provide protection. Dogs would have been domesticated in a, natural wolf habitat, probably taiga or other cold forests, and then brought along the human migration paths. And you can look more into dog migration. I have a link in the blog post around this stage, right? So if you want to include dogs into your maps, you can do something similar here. But for the most part, dogs would just be found everywhere. So let's map our domesticated animals. And again, this is our initial map. So we are going to go through and make a map of domesticated animals based on our list of 14 plus, which you can adapt for any fantasy animals/creatures that would have been domesticated in your world. And we can simplify a bit and break down our areas into the following categories, but there will be some overlapping. So we have here sheeps and goats are both found in mountains and highlands, so I went ahead and marked those here in green. Add llamas where there are high elevations with drier biomes like shrubland. You can see that added in here in the purple, and I apologize if some of these are kind of hard to read. I wanted to show the biome background while also showing you the key, and some of these are easier to see than others. Alpacas, high elevations with humid colder biomes, so you can see those added in here. Yaks, mountainous plateaus with grassland or tundra. You mainly see these in that southern continent and a little bit in the northern regions of the northern and western continents. Pigs and water buffalo, subtropical and warmer sides of temperate forests, grasslands, and marshes. So you see those added in here. Cattle or bison, any grasslands or woodlands that are not mountainous or arctic. There will be patches of these there. Horses, plains, hilllands, not mountainous or very steep, grasslands or steppe. And then camels and donkeys, arid deserts that aren't too mountainous. And then reindeer, tundra, and taiga forests. So, now with all the potential major domesticable animals mapped out, we get something that looks like this, which is a bit messy looking, right? But now we need to account for extinction events. So look at your extinction event map and start crossing off animals to account for those extinction events. Some of our areas are combinations of animals, so sheep/goats, pig/water buffalo, cattle/bison, and camel/donkey. So you may need to indicate if you are leaving one of these and not the other. And you can see in this map down below, I did a pretty thorough job cutting things out, and I tried to remove different things to create more of a diverse effect, if you would, right? So I left donkeys in that northern continent, but then I have horses in the right continent, and I don't have horses for the most part in the southern continent. So let's talk about beasts of burden. So beasts of burden can be used for carrying people and supplies, pulling heavy equipment, and other heavy labor. Each beast of burden is going to have different traits that allow them to be used in different ways. Some animals are faster, some are stronger, and some are able to cross more difficult terrain. For example, llamas can be used as pack animals, helping transport loads, but they can't be ridden by people, unless you're really tiny. They are also unable to pull heavy machinery like plows. However, they can move around in the mountains much more easily than cattle or horses would be able to. So we are going to consider 3 categories of available animals which will overlap. There are heavy draft animals, aka animals used for pulling equipment like plows and wheeled vehicles, mounts that can efficiently carry people, and light draft/pack animals that can carry supplies and pull equipment but aren't mounts or heavy draft animals. So small livestock of various forms will generally be available everywhere, but they aren't overly impactful for our purposes here when we're building culture. Because remember, the point of this is not to build what type of animals would be available in our area. We are trying to figure out some of the base animals that would have been available, some of the effects they would have had on the cultures that were developing in different regions, and figure out what impacts those might have had on our societies. So All civilizations will have access to birds, meaning there will be egg-laying birds to domesticate. There are going to be other small animals typically used as pets, etc., etc. We're not going to worry about all of that right now. We are only worried about the beasts of burden. Regardless of the category, civilizations relying on these animals will have developed their animal husbandry to the point that it will impact their culture. Not only does living closely with animals affect immune systems, but herding cultures will typically see herders not marrying. This increases the number of children born outside of marriage, which can impact the rigidity of family structures and social acceptance of such children. And I want to talk about this a little bit further, but you get a very different pattern when it comes to the cultures that arise in predominantly like animal husbandry-based civilizations versus ones that arise in more strictly agriculture-based civilizations. And when you think about this, when there is a herding culture, right, and the whole thing is following these herds around, especially when you look at transhumance pastoral societies, which we will get into, but that is essentially where the herds kind of migrate between two different places or a couple places seasonally. So there will be a main village where maybe they live in the winter or the summer or something, one specific season, and then the herds will travel to better pastures for another season and then come back, right? In places like that, you will typically see the people that are leaving and coming back are typically men, right? They're typically young men that don't have families because they're fine going out and, not being at home for long periods of time. And so in a lot of these types of cultures, you will typically see a very large acceptance of children born outside of marriage, because when these, younger men come back and they have dalliances, affairs, whatever, like they still have relationships, you tend to get children outside of wedlock. And those children that are, bastards or whatever in this civilization typically end up being very cheap labor later on, which then feeds back into the system of them then being herders or, doing other types of labor there. And then this sort of builds this sort of culture where it is very accepted because it is beneficial to the society to have these out of marriage children, because they become cheap labor, which then feed back into the economy. And you tend to see that in a lot of these types of civilizations that have a lot of, herding. And that's not the only effect. That's one of the big ones, is that it just affects the rigidity of those family structures and how important it is to have marriage, right? Or, these types of strict guidelines on exactly what a family is. Different civilizations will shun children that are born out of marriage versus ones that don't. And so that's a big impact on a culture just from whether or not they are predominantly, animal domesticators or herders or whatever, or if they came from that sort of an environment. But the thing with all of this that we're going to get into more later, but the point is, this is a pattern, right? This is a case where a certain type of behavior, right, is beneficial for the society and makes them more successful in these situations, right? These herders that don't marry, that are fine going out and coming back and are, cheap labor, they don't have to support a family so that they don't have to be paid as much, right? They can then have children that are born outside of marriage that goes back into the system, right? Like, what you're getting out of this is cheap labor, right? That's what this social situation or social behavior is creating, is cheap labor, which then benefits the society, right? So anything else that would create that same effect of having cheap labor, and you could come up with all sorts of things that work into magic systems, etc. All of those things are going to have a similar effect, right? Where family structures are not going to be as rigid, and you are going to see, children born outside of marriage, or whatever the behavior is. Whatever the behavior is will be more socially acceptable, whereas if there is behavior that negatively impacts the success of the society, you will see that being a lot less acceptable and will be built into the culture and religious values, etc. of the people. Minor spiel. Let's get back to this. Okay. Draft animals. I let my whole computer time out while I was doing that. But anyway, draft animals. Having domesticable animals capable of pulling plows, wheeled vehicles, trees and logging, etc. is a big boon to civilization. Draft animals can make agriculture and industry more efficient, allowing a civilization to grow and advance more easily. So all the animals we listed here have been used as draft animals at some point. Yes, even pigs. I googled this because I didn't understand why this list was the list it was when it had things like goats and pigs. I was like, goats and pigs aren't, beasts of burden. Like, why are they on this list with like cows and horses and all this? And then I googled it and nope, yep, they've been used to pull plows and other stuff like that. Like, obviously lighter ones. There will be strength limitations to some of these animals, right? But the most popular draft animals are probably ox and horses, but other strong ones are bison, yak, water buffalo, reindeer, large donkeys, and even camels. And you can see that in some of these pictures. You see a goat pulling a cart. You see a horse pulling a cart down there. You see, I believe those are yaks with saddles on them up in the mountains and other types of bags. So we can consider these heavy draft animals and the others light draft animals. So mounts and pack animals. And you have a reindeer here on the left and a water buffalo here on the right. Pack animals carry people or supplies, but there is definitely a difference between animals that can carry some bags and animals that can be ridden by humans, aka mounts. Not only do animals have to be strong enough and large enough to carry adult humans, but their spinal structure has to support carrying weight in that way. So a decent number of animals on our list can be used for riding, including reindeer, water buffalo, yaks, and oxen, but horses, camels, and donkeys are probably the most effective due to their temperaments and physical structure. And that is not to say that you couldn't have a civilization that has really bred a certain type of animal to be more of a mount, right? Like taking a reindeer and having them grow larger, like I'm going to do in my world. Or having, cattle that were bred to be very narrow and to have this adjusted spinal structure so that they could be used as mounts more easily, right? But you have to account for those differences. Pack animals are going to be the most important in areas that don't really allow for wheeled vehicles. So this includes camels in the desert, donkeys, llamas, small loads, and even horses in more mountainous regions, and water buffalo in more waterlogged marshy areas. So wheeled vehicles also require some semblance of roads, so areas that haven't been built up by more advanced civilization to have roads will need to rely more heavily on pack animals to ride and carry things over large distances, or long distances, yeah. So, mapping beasts of burden. We are going to start by mapping the more granular clusters as the main areas that domesticated these animals, and without any adjustments to these animals, we are looking at heavy draft animals being our cattle, horses, bison, yak, water buffalo, reindeer, larger donkeys, and camels. I have that here in this brown color. I have mounts being horses, camels, and donkeys because those all overlap with heavy draft animals. I just added the diagonal green lines. And then pack or light draft animals. This is basically everywhere else with domesticated animals from our previous map that we haven't already added. And for my map, I mentioned this already, but I decided that reindeer evolved to be a bit bigger in my world, maybe through domestication or other natural ways, mainly in the northern mountains of my western continent and in my southern continent, and this allowed me to classify them as mounts. You can do fun stuff like this, make it weird, So, expanding our map now. So we want to go through and account for the easy spread of beasts of burden within the large clusters we mapped out before. The major 5 should be able to spread everywhere within the culture, while the others will have a more limited spread. They are not as easily adaptable to other areas. So consider if the climate and geography would be able to support these animals, or if you want to make adjustments to make it work, right? Areas would probably be more likely to adopt new animals if they fill a category that was previously empty. So for example, bringing heavy draft animals to a region that didn't already have them, they'd put a lot more effort into, more difficult domestication and adaptions, right? So you would expect the potential for weirder animals being adapted to different environments in that case. Yeah, that made sense. I decided to go back and remove the horses that I had mapped in the southern half of my eastern continent. It was just like a little bit to provide a bit more diversity here. So when we spread out civilizations a bit in the next part, we will incorporate people taking certain animals with them. And this is going to be a big thing that we'll get into in the next part. But final thoughts for, animal domestication and animal husbandry. Now that we've finished this first part of agriculture, in the next part we're going to look at farming and the types of societies. And my plan here, and this has been adjusting as I go and get feedback from people, mainly in my Discord, is I want to make a sort of like initial map, right? Which is sort of what we have here right now, right? With this lower map with the heavy draft mounts and pack light draft animal categories, right? We're going to have that, and we're going to do a similar thing with agriculture, where we have this initial map, not accounting for any sort of spread or empires or anything like that. And then in the next part, we are going to look at common conflict, and we are going to build multiple eras. And we're not going to be too worried about like the technological age of these, right? We're just going to build them up, and then over time we're going to have different eras where we incorporate different types of conflict, and all of these levels of conflict will give us a more interesting map at the end, but also will give us a starting point for histories where you can look at an area and decide, oh, you know, this area has been pretty war-torn, or these people migrated this super long distance. That's going to incorporate into their mythology, and etc., etc. So that's the game plan. So next part, farming and types of societies, and then in the next part we are going to look at that sort of conflict and spread, and, you know, some civilizations will go away, some will be added, etc., etc. And then after that, I think we're going to talk about the actual specific cultural dimensions in these places, looking at, you know, what types of cultural qualities these types of areas will share, which ones will be different, what you'll see in different places most likely. But again, a lot of this, you need to just come up with wonderful stories for the different places, and this is sort of a starting pattern to work with, but it's fine for a lot of areas. But, you know, especially wherever your main civilizations are going to be, or wherever you're focusing on, like, do some weird stuff, do some interesting stuff, be creative, break the patterns, right? That's what we're trying to do here. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, if you want to join the Discord, just go to my website and fill out the contact me and ask for the link to the Discord. It's focused on world building entirely, so if you're not really interested in world building, it's not really going to be the place for you. And if you have any other requests for anything to be added to this guide, just, you know, you can contact me with that too. But I think that's going to be it for this one, so I'll see you in the next one.